Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a really specific, incredibly turbulent period along the Moselle River, roughly between 1780 and 1830.
Yeah, it's this half century that goes way beyond just, flags changing hands from the old Trier electorate to French rule and then eventually Prussian control.
It feels much deeper than politics. The source is painted as a genuine existential crisis for the people living there.
Absolutely. When you start digging into the chronicles, the personal accounts from that time, you realize it wasn't just about war. It was like their whole world was failing.
The foundation's cracking, you mean?
Exactly. The very basis of life there just crumbled. And it forced people into this terrible choice. Do you try and hold on, stick it out through the chaos, or do you take this enormous life-changing gamble, a leap into the complete unknown thousands of miles away?
And that's our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To trace that journey using the records we have. We'll start with that period of, well, natural disasters and almost complete anarchy, the time that spawned the infamous Moselle Bandits.
Right. And then move through to how a new, pretty brutal form of justice was imposed.
And finally, follow those incredibly ambitious pioneers who risked it all, trading, their familiar vineyards for the wilderness of southern Brazil. It's quite a story.
It really is. We've got accounts of the bandit who faced the guillotine, the sort of quiet heroes who kept education going against all odds, and even the quite poignant isolation felt by a pioneer who helped found a whole dynasty out in the tropics.
It sounds like a story of resilience, ultimately, whether people adapted at home or took that radical step abroad.
That's a good way to put it. Resilience under extreme pressure.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Pünderich, late 1780s. We often focus on the French Revolution's impact, the Franzosenheit, but the sources suggest the community was already struggling before the political order collapsed. What was happening with the environment back then?
Yeah, that's crucial. It felt like nature itself was turning against them. The years right before the French arrived were marked by some severe climatic instability. 1783, for example.
What happened then?
The records talk about a massive dryness. I mean, so bad that wells and rivers actually ran dry. For a community built around the river, for trade, for agriculture, that's catastrophic.
Devastating. And there was something else mentioned, a persistent fog.
Yes, the Hohenrauch. This wasn't just morning mist, it was a dry fog or haze that hung around for months. The chronicles even note you couldn't see major landmarks like the Marienburg Castle across the river from the town itself.
Wow. That must have been incredibly unsettling.
Oh, deeply. Think about it for a farming society so dependent on the sun, the seasons, the visible cycle of things. This constant unnatural haze would feel almost apocalyptic, like the world itself was just blurring, refusing to behave normally.
The sense of the world closing in.
Yeah.
And then 1784 brought something completely different, but just as destructive, right? Water-related this time?
Yeah, catastrophic ice drift. The Rhine and the Moselle froze hard, then broke up violently.
Ooh.
Massive chunks of ice surging downstream. The chronicles record it as a severe disaster. It would have wiped out ferries, damaged bridges, eroded the banks, just chaos.
So you've got drought one year, these violent ice floods the next.
Exactly. And then you overlay that environmental stress onto the political weakness of the old electorate and the arrival of the French forces, the Franzosenheit. It creates this perfect vacuum. Public safety, local institutions, that they just dissolved.
How did that breakdown affect the established families? The ones with, long-held wealth? Because wealth needs stability, contracts, property rights.
That's precisely the point. Families that had held wealth for generations, like the Hermes family who were linked by marriage to the Kerners, another established name, they suddenly found their fortunes weren't sustainable.
Why not?
Well, it was economic collapse driven by war, constant requisitioning of supplies, confusing new French taxes, and crucially, no reliable law enforcement. If you couldn't get a debt paid or protect your warehouse, your wealth just evaporated. It became almost meaningless on paper.
And so the places that should have been centers of commerce, like the mills, they became symbols of something else entirely.
Right, symbols of lawlessness. Think about the Mühlen im Aufbach, the mills along the Aufbach stream. Historically, these are hubs, right? Processing grain, representing capital investment, often a bit isolated.
Makes sense.
When government breaks down, these places become prime targets. They transform from community gathering points for trade into hideouts for bandits, places to stash loot, or locations for robberies away from any effective policing. They really showed how vulnerable the whole economic structure had become.
In this era of collapse, this vulnerability, it finds its human face in probably the most notorious figure from that time. Johann Schiffmann.
Ah, yes, Johann Schiffmann, born 1758, son of a miller herself, Christian Schiffmann. But everyone knew him as Tuchhannes.
Tuchhannes.
And he wasn't just some desperate guy stealing food. He was seen as a serious menace. He was publicly branded, literally, marked not just as a pig trader, which often meant illicitly moving livestock across borders that were suddenly very porous, but as an active senior member of the Moselle Bandits. This was organized crime, often operating across borders, thriving precisely because local justice had vanished during the Franzensenzeit.
There's often one specific crime that really cements someone's notoriety. What was the act linked to Tuchhannes that sort of defined this period of anarchy?
The key moment seems to be an alleged bloody deed at the Sprinker Mill in 1796. The records are sometimes a bit vague, maybe to protect families involved, but the story consistently points to a violent robbery, possibly involving murder, at one of these vulnerable mill sites.
So more than just theft.
Oh, much more. It was seen as a brutal display of criminal power trampling over ordinary life. After that, Tuchhannes had to flee. His eventual capture really became the turning point for the incoming regime.
So his story isn't just about crime anymore. It becomes a narrative tool used by the new French authorities to signal a very dramatic, very final end to that whole era of lawlessness.
Precisely. His capture, his trial, it was turned into a public spectacle, a way to mark a brutal shift from anarchy back to enforced order.
He used the word brutal there. Yeah. And the new French administration certainly didn't shy away from forceful methods to restore that order, did they?
No, they employed what you could call shocking finality. In 1802, the new French justice system, which was centralized, efficient, and, well, ruthlessly modern compared to what came before, condemned Johann Schiffmann to death in Koblenz, unanimously.
And the method.
The sources specifically mention the whirring of the guillotine, the Fallbühlersassen. This wasn't some local messy execution. This was state power, clinical, visible, terrifyingly efficient.
The guillotine. The Fallbühlersassen. That itself must have been a shock. So different from traditional local punishments. How did people react to this very French form of justice? Was it seen as necessary or just another foreign imposition?
That's a really good question. For the average person who'd lived in fear of the bandits, the guillotine offered immediate, undeniable proof that the chaos was over. It worked. So while many likely found it brutal, perhaps even horrifying, the return of physical safety and some commercial security probably outweighed those concerns for a lot of people.
It sent a message.
An unmistakable one. If the state could catch and execute someone as infamous as Tuchhannes, well, everyone else had better fall into line. It served its purpose as a symbol of restored power.
And this new justice, it even drew lines within families involved in the banditry, didn't it?
Yes, that's a key point. The process, however harsh, aimed to be systematic, not just a purge. While Johann Schiffmann met his end, his own brother, Joseph Schiffmann, was actually acquitted.
Interesting.
It's vital because it shows the new state, first French, then Prussian after 1815, trying to establish the rule of law, distinguishing individual guilt from just being associated with the chaos. It allowed society to start healing, maybe even with the memory of the guillotine still fresh.
Okay, so while the state is using, frankly, violence to impose order from the top down, there must have been people working quietly within the community to hold things together, to ensure life could actually go on. Who were they?
Right. These are the less dramatic but maybe more crucial figures in the long run, the stabilizers. The Hulten family really stands out here as representing that enduring upper-middle-class commitment to public service. Take Heinrich Josef Hulten, born in 1796.
What was his role?
From 1819 right through to 1847, he served as the Ludemagister in Pünderich.
The schoolmaster, the Ludemagister. What did that actually involve during such a period of upheaval? Flags changing, laws changing.
His job was essentially to secure the future. The title Ludemagister itself carries a certain dignity, doesn't it? Heinrich Hulten's steady work was about providing continuity in education. He made sure children were learning, whether the French were nominally in charge or the Prussians. Textbooks might change, currencies might shift, but the school bell kept ringing.
A symbol of normalcy.
And more than just symbolic, we know that after the wars, student numbers actually started to climb steadily. That's a quiet vote of confidence from the community, isn't it? Trusting figures like Hulten to rebuild stability and create opportunity.
And this dedication to institutions wasn't just in the schoolhouse.
No, it extended to the church as well. His brother, Johann Nepomuk Stefan Hulten, born just a couple of years earlier in 1794, was a priest. He embodied the strengthening of church authority, which was also vital for community cohesion.
So the school and the church become anchors.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
As political loyalties shifted back and forth, these institutions, faith and education, offered something more permanent. They provided a kind of moral and intellectual stability when the political ground felt constantly unsteady.
It sounds like by the 1820s, things were settling down. The guillotine had made its point. The schoolmaster was reinforcing order. Was the danger really over? Or did the sources show that threat lingered?
Violence, unfortunately, doesn't just disappear when a new administration takes over. There's a really tragic story from March 1821, the death of Peter Suarez, born in 1793.
What happened to him?
He died violently. It serves as this late sharp shock, a reminder that the dangers from the lawless period hadn't vanished overnight, even with Prussian bureaucracy supposedly in place.
That's quite stark. A man like Suarez, born into the chaos, survives the worst of the banditry in the French wars, only to die violently years later when things are meant to be stable.
It really underscores the point. His widow, Maria Katharina Schmitz, born the same year, 1793, she had to carry that loss. It meant that even with Tuchhannes gone, even with the school filling up, that undercurrent of fear, that memory of anarchy, it was still potent. And maybe that lingering insecurity pushed people towards more radical solutions.
Right, that makes sense. Facing ongoing hardship, political ambiguity, maybe that latent threat of violence. Even the restored order wasn't enough for everyone. And we see this dramatic shift outward, don't we?
Yeah.
Away from just fixing things on the Moselle towards leaving it behind entirely for the new world.
Exactly. This is where desperation seems to morph into something else, a kind of calculated, ambitious adventure. The local problems were real, but they coincided with this growing global awareness, particularly of colonization efforts in South America. Brazil was actively recruiting Europeans.
Which must have been an almost unthinkable idea for people whose families had farmed those same vineyards for centuries.
A complete break from tradition, an enormous leap.
Who is the first person we know of from Pünderich who actually took that leap? The one driven by pure adventure, it seems.
That seems to be Johann Daniel Rockenbach, born 1803. He's documented as the first single emigrant from the community to head for Brazil back in 1825.
Leaving alone.
Yes, which suggests it wasn't about relocating a family facing immediate starvation, but more about individual enterprise, maybe a desire for a totally fresh start. He just went for it, a real leap into the unknown, personally.
So he's the adventurer. But the emigration movement really gained traction, became more established, when people with more to lose got involved. Like the wine grower Matthias Franzen.
Matthias Franzen, born 1777. He's a different profile. He embodies the ambitious pioneer, driven maybe not just by escaping hardship, but by careful calculation. Well, as a wine grower from the upper middle class, he wasn't destitute. But he likely looked at the situation on the Moselle, the taxes, the shifting politics, the post-war economy, and saw a limited ceiling for growth. Then he looked at Brazil, at the wilderness. Incredibly risky, yes, but the potential upside. Theoretically limitless. He made his move in 1829.
And he didn't just slot into an existing settlement, did he? He took that Moselle spirit with him.
He did. Franzen became one of the co-founders of the colony called São José do Hortêncio in southern Brazil. The German settlers had various names for the area: Picada do Cadeia, the Portuguese Schneiss, or Portuguese Trail. He was literally putting down new roots, applying his skills to a completely new environment.
And the timing of his arrival and his group's arrival turned out to be incredibly important. According to the sources, they got in just under the wire, so to speak.
Absolutely razor-thin timing. São José do Hortêncio was founded in 1829, and that lines up perfectly with when the official surveyor, Bucha, arrived in the main hub of São Leopoldo. It confirms they were right there on the edge, clearing new land.
And they were among the very last to get official support.
That's the crucial part. They were among the final groups to benefit from the Brazilian government's colonization push.
What stopped it?
A specific piece of legislation. A Brazilian law passed on December 15, 1830. It completely banned all government spending on foreign colonization efforts. Effectively, it just slammed the door shut on subsidized, organized immigration for years to come.
Wow.
So Franzen and his group, they took a massive risk. But their timing, whether it was luck or smart planning, was spot on. They got there, got established, just before that window of opportunity closed.
We really need to pause and think about the sheer effort involved in that decision. The journey itself.
Yeah.
It wasn't just booking a ticket. The accounts we have make it sound like an absolute epic.
Oh, it makes our idea of long-distance travel seem trivial, doesn't it? You can almost break it down into phases, and each one is filled with uncertainty we can barely imagine today. Phase 1. Just getting to the port. Yes, 4 weeks traveling overland just to reach Bremen. They arrived there June 21st, 1828. Think about that. Finding wagons, getting provisions, the final goodbyes. 4 weeks just for that first leg.
But the really brutal part wasn't the travel itself, but the waiting in Bremen.
That must have been psychologically crushing. They had to wait 13 weeks, nearly 3 months in Bremen before they could even board their ship, the Olbers, on September 12th.
13 weeks.
Imagine sitting in a foreign port city, your money dwindling, totally cut off from home, just watching the harbor, waiting for news. That wait alone could have broken people.
And then finally, phase 2. The sea voyage. Boarding the Olbers. But even that wasn't straightforward. The scale of the risk became terrifyingly clear.
They set sail into the North Sea on September 26, 1828. The specific account we have says the passage was difficult, but their little group was lucky, relatively speaking. But look at the numbers for the whole ship.
How many people?
Around 800 people crammed onto this sailing ship, and during the voyage, 47 of them died, buried at sea.
47. That's almost 6% mortality just on the crossing, before they even saw Brazil. That figure really drives home the stakes, doesn't it? The Promised Land had a very real, very high price tag.
It absolutely underscores the desperation motivating them. So phase 3, the arrival. They finally reached Rio de Janeiro on December 17, 1828. Just getting from Bremen to Rio took, the records say, 3,400 hours of travel time.
Incredible. But Rio wasn't the final stop.
No, another wait, 7 weeks in a place called Armação, near Rio. Then they finally got onto a smaller Portuguese coastal ship to sail south to their actual destination, São Leopoldo. They arrived there March 10th, 1829.
So let me get this straight.
Right.
From leaving the Moselle near Trier to arriving in São Leopoldo.
40 weeks. Almost 3/4 of a year. 40 weeks of travel and waiting.
Unbelievable. And what did they find when they finally got there, this half-wild land?
San Leopoldo was the established German center, but their land was in the surrounding primary forest, areas being newly cleared. The first reports sound, well, hopeful but also realistic about the sheer hard work involved.
What about basic survival? Food?
They focused on self-sufficiency right away. The sources proudly mention they were baking their own white bread with flour from their own mill. That suggests they successfully brought essential skills and maybe even mill components with them and got them working quickly.
Were their old European skills useful? Like the cobbler you mentioned? Or Franzen's wine growing?
For some, definitely, and profitable, too. The cobbler who wrote the travelogue said he was swamped with work and getting good prices, 24 francs for boots, 10 for shoes. Apparently, leather was cheaper than back home.
So there was an internal economy functioning?
Yes, skilled labor was valuable, even if hard cash was scarce and maybe unreliable due to inflation. People were trading skills and goods effectively within the colony.
Okay, let's talk about the environment itself. Treating the familiar Moselle climate for a subtropical Brazil. Was the jungle terrifying like you might imagine?
Surprisingly, the initial reports are quite positive about the health aspects. They describe the climate as the healthiest, not too hot, not too cold, pure air, good water, a real contrast to the memories of that oppressive Hohenrauch fog or the destructive ice drifts.
Interesting. Do they even see cold weather?
They noted very rare, very brief snow or ice, only the thickness of a bread knife blade in August, which is winter there. Must have seemed incredibly exotic.
And the famous jungle dangers. Big cats.
Ooh.
Snakes.
This is where their perspective is fascinating. They were thrilled that hunting was completely free, no permits, no foresters like under Prussian rule, a huge plus. They saw monkeys, wild pigs, capybaras.
Were they scared of them?
Crucially, they describe most of the larger animals as not dangerous to humans. Their main lens seems to be, is it a resource? Can we hunt it? Not necessarily, is it going to eat me?
So the really big threats weren't the jaguars, maybe, but the little things, the pests.
That's the ironic twist of the jungle frontier, isn't it? You trade the fear of human bandits for the relentless annoyance and danger of pests. The letters complain bitterly about ants so bad they'd literally drive people out of their beds at night. And worse, sand fleas. They burrow into your feet, cause infections on the frontier without easy access to medicine that could be genuinely crippling or even dangerous.
And snakes.
Snakes, they noted, were not so wicked unless you actually stepped on one. So manage the big, obvious threats, yes, but it was the small, persistent, daily grind against nature's smaller annoyances and dangers that really defined life there.
It's a profound shift, isn't it? Trading the known chaos of human society politics, crime for the unknown, relentless chaos of the natural world itself.
And we know that Matthias Franzen's calculated gamble, it did pay off in the long run. He and his family laid the groundwork for what became a prosperous dynasty in Brazil. But that success definitely came at an emotional cost. We see that very clearly in a letter he wrote around 1832.
Right, this letter to his brother-in-law, Matthias Rockenbach. This gives us that incredibly rare personal insight into the isolation they must have felt.
It might be the single most powerful piece of evidence in this whole story.
Yeah.
Here's Franzen. He's made it through the journey. He's established himself. Things are probably looking up materially. But what's his overwhelming feeling? It's this desperate, profound longing for news from home.
He mentions he'd written before.
Yes, he says, quite bitterly, he'd written twice already and had received no reply, which tells you everything about the communication lines, letters taking months, maybe getting lost entirely.
So after achieving the goals, security, maybe health, some prosperity, his main anxiety wasn't about the farm or the weather. It was about information.
Exactly that. He pleads with his brother-in-law, please write me quickly, tell me a lot of new things, and listen to what he asks for.
About war, plague, epidemics, or peace, and what Germany looks like now. He just wants to know everything, the state of the world he left behind.
And the reason for this urgency, he states it with heartbreaking simplicity. We don't get newspapers in the jungle.
Wow. That one line just sums up the entire sacrifice, doesn't it? He swapped the chaotic, maybe information-overloaded, politically charged life on the Moselle for a life that was maybe healthier, maybe more prosperous, but lived in total social and political silence.
The man risked everything to build a new future, and he had absolutely no idea if the world he'd left behind was even still standing, let alone what was happening in it.
The noise of the revolution and the bandits replaced by the quiet of the jungle.
And think about the specific things he asks about war, plague, peace. These aren't trivial questions. Did Prussia survive? Are there new conflicts affecting his relatives back home? Did that feared epidemic ever break out? Even with material comfort, that deep, gnawing uncertainty about the old world seems to have been the hardest thing to bear.
And yet, despite this radical move, this jump into the unknown, his anchor seems to remain very traditional.
Yes, the letter ends with this deep expression of religious faith. He offers a hopeful farewell, placing his trust explicitly in the protection of the Holy Trinity and the Virgin Mary. It feels like that spiritual framework, carried all the way from the Moselle villages to San Jose de Hortensio, was the one constant, the one essential link back to the order he'd left behind.
It was his internal news source, perhaps, the unchanging truth when everything else was uncertain and silent.
Well put. It was their anchor in an information blackout. Hashtag outro.
So looking back at this 50-year period, this deep dive really shows two very different responses to a profound crisis within the same community. We saw the Moselle region defined by these stark contrasts. First, that descent into chaos, environmental disaster, social breakdown, the anarchy personified by Tuchhannes the bandit, and his very public end under the French guillotine.
Right. But then alongside that, you had the quiet resilience, the stabilizers. People like the schoolmaster, Heinrich Josef Hulten, and his brother, the priest, just steadfastly holding on to education, faith, community structure. They were mending the fabric of society right there at home, even as regimes changed above them.
But for others, that wasn't enough. Or maybe the calculation pointed elsewhere. Figures like Matthias Franzen, the ambitious wine grower, or Johann Daniel Rockenbach, the adventurer, they made that radical choice.
They staked everything on Brazil, a gamble on the unknown, perfectly timed, as it turned out, just before that window for subsidized colonization slammed shut. So you have these two clear paths emerging from the wreckage of the old electorate. Dogged resilience at home, or that incredibly arduous 40-week journey to start anew abroad.
And Franzen's letter really brings home the cost of that second path, doesn't it? He achieved the material goals, founded a dynasty even, but he traded the political turmoil and, yes, the news and gossip of the Moselle for a kind of spiritual isolation in the jungle.
Material security versus informational connection. He had plenty of the former, but was starved of the latter. He lacked that fundamental comfort of just knowing what was happening in the world.
It really makes you think about what we value today, doesn't it? In our age, we're drowning in information, often overwhelmed by it. But these pioneers, they gave up almost everything, their home, their language, easy contact with family, yet they couldn't escape that deep human need for news.
We are absolutely saturated with news now, but Franzen's plea from the jungle forces you to consider what a fundamental comfort that is, one we just take for granted. If you were truly cut off, living deep in that jungle, knowing a letter might take a year, if it arrived at all.
What single piece of news would be most vital?
Exactly. What update news of war, of pestilence, or maybe just news of peace back home, what would you sacrifice almost anything just to hear? That intense hunger for context, for connection to the wider world, that's the enduring, powerful legacy of those ambitious Moselle pioneers.